Sarah Mitchell had dreamed of flying since she was 7 years old. Growing up on a small farm in Kansas, she would lie on her back in the wheat fields, watching jets streak across the endless sky above. Her father would shake his head when she talked about becoming a pilot. "Flying is for boys, Sarah," he'd say gently. "Maybe you should think about nursing or teaching." But Sarah never listened to those words. In high school, she excelled in math and science while other girls focused on home economics. She spent her weekends at the local airfield, washing planes and running errands just to be near the aircraft. The old pilots there began to notice her dedication. Tom Bradley, a retired Air Force colonel, started teaching her about aerodynamics and navigation during quiet afternoons. When Sarah turned 18, she shocked her small town by announcing she was joining the Air Force. The recruitment officer looked surprised when she walked into his office. Women could serve in the military, but combat roles were strictly forbidden. "You can be a nurse, a clerk, or work in communications," he explained. Sarah smiled politely and signed up anyway, knowing it was her first step toward something bigger. Basic training was brutal. Male recruits constantly reminded her that she didn't belong. Drill sergeants pushed her harder than anyone else, waiting for her to quit. But Sarah had been working on the farm since she could walk. Her hands were already calloused, her back already strong. She finished second in her training class and earned respect from even her harshest critics. After basic training, Sarah was assigned to aircraft maintenance. It wasn't flying, but she was finally working with the machines she loved. She learned every bolt, wire, and system on the base's fighter jets. While other mechanics focused on their assigned tasks, Sarah studied everything. She memorized flight manuals that weren't meant for her eyes and practiced radio procedures during her off hours. The base commander, Colonel Williams, began to notice Sarah's exceptional knowledge. During inspections, she could answer questions about aircraft systems that stumped seasoned mechanics. Other officers started consulting her when they had technical problems. Her reputation grew, but so did the resentment from some of her male colleagues. "She thinks she's better than us," they would whisper. Some tried to sabotage her work, hiding tools or giving her incorrect information. Sarah never complained or reported them. Instead, she worked twice as hard, arriving early and staying late. Her dedication became legendary on the base. One day, a visiting test pilot was having problems with his aircraft. Several mechanics had looked at it without finding the issue. Sarah was cleaning nearby when she overheard the frustrated conversation. She approached hesitantly and suggested checking a specific valve that was known to malfunction in that aircraft model. The pilot looked skeptical but agreed to let her examine it. Within minutes, Sarah had identified and fixed the problem. The test pilot was amazed. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. Sarah explained her years of study and her dream of becoming a pilot. The man introduced himself as Captain James Morrison, a test pilot for the new F-12 program. It was the most advanced fighter jet ever built, faster than anything in the sky. "The F-12 program is always looking for the best people," he said thoughtfully. "But they've never had a female pilot." Sarah's heart raced. She had heard rumors about the F-12, but never imagined she could be part of it. Captain Morrison handed her his card. "If you're serious about flying, call me. But I have to warn you, the resistance you've faced here will be nothing compared to what you'll encounter there." That night, Sarah stared at the card for hours. She knew that trying to join the F-12 program would mean facing the most elite, traditional, and male-dominated group in the entire Air Force. She would be challenging decades of tradition and military culture. Her family would worry, her colleagues would mock her, and she would face rejection at every turn. But as she looked out her barracks window at the aircraft on the flight line, Sarah made her decision. She had come too far to turn back now. The next morning, she made the phone call that would change her life forever. Captain Morrison answered on the first ring, almost as if he had been expecting her call. "I want to try," she said simply. "Then, pack your bags," he replied. "You're going to Nevada. And, Sarah, prepare yourself for the fight of your life." The Nevada desert was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Miles of empty sand stretched toward distant mountains, and the heat seemed to rise from the earth itself. She arrived at the classified facility in a military transport, clutching her single duffel bag. The base looked ordinary from outside, but She knew that behind those fences lay the most advanced aircraft in the world. Captain Morrison met her at the gate, his expression serious. "Before we go any further, you need to understand what you're walking into," he said as they drove through the base. The F-12 program has the best pilots in the Air Force. They've been training together for years. They see themselves as an elite brotherhood. He paused. And now they're being told that a woman wants to join them. The briefing room fell silent when Sarah walked in. 24 male pilots turned to stare at her, their faces ranging from surprised to openly hostile. At the front of the room stood Colonel Richard Hayes, the program director. His weathered face showed no emotion as he introduced Sarah to the group. "Gentlemen, this is Sergeant Mitchell. She's here to evaluate our training program," he said carefully, not mentioning her hopes of joining it. The pilots exchanged glances. They weren't fooled by the diplomatic language. Major Brett Thompson, the program's top pilot, spoke first. "With respect, sir, what exactly is she evaluating? She's not even a pilot." His voice carried barely concealed contempt. Several other pilots nodded in agreement. "Sergeant Mitchell has extensive knowledge of aircraft systems and has been recommended by Test Pilot Command," Colonel Hayes replied. "She'll be observing our procedures for the next month." For the next 4 weeks, Sarah watched from the sidelines as the F-12 pilots trained. She studied their techniques, memorized their procedures, and absorbed every detail of the advanced aircraft. The F-12 was magnificent, sleek, powerful, and incredibly complex. It could fly at speeds that would liquefy a normal person's body, and its systems were more sophisticated than anything she had ever seen. The pilots largely ignored her presence, but she could feel their resentment. During breaks, they would make loud comments about distractions and people who don't belong. When she asked technical questions, they would answer briefly and dismissively. Only a few showed her any respect, and even they were careful not to appear too friendly in front of the others. Sarah's breakthrough came during a simulation exercise. The pilots were practicing emergency procedures when the computer system malfunctioned. The expensive simulation equipment crashed, threatening to shut down training for days while technicians were flown in from California. While the frustrated pilots complained about the delay, Sarah quietly examined the system. Her years of studying aircraft computers paid off as she traced the problem to a corrupted memory module. Working carefully, she managed to isolate the fault and restore the system to working order. The pilots watched in stunned silence as the simulation came back online. Colonel Hayes approached her with a mixture of surprise and respect. "How did you know how to fix that?" he asked. "The F-12's computer architecture is similar to systems I've worked on," Sarah explained modestly. "I've been studying the technical manuals." Major Thompson's attitude shifted slightly after that incident. "Maybe you do know something about these aircraft," he admitted grudgingly. It was the first compliment she had received from any of the pilots. As the month progressed, Sarah began to prove her value in small ways. She spotted a potential problem with landing gear hydraulics that had been overlooked. She suggested modifications to emergency checklists that made them more efficient. Her technical knowledge became impossible to ignore, even by her harshest critics. But the real test came when Colonel Hayes called her to his office at the end of her evaluation period. "Sergeant Mitchell, I've been impressed by your performance here," he began. "But I need to be honest with you. The Pentagon has made it clear that women are not permitted in combat roles. The F-12 is classified as a combat aircraft." Sarah had been expecting this moment. "Sir, I understand the regulations, but I believe I could contribute to this program in ways that go beyond current policies." Colonel Hayes studied her carefully. "Are you asking me to recommend you for pilot training?" "Yes, sir." The colonel was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah, I've been in this business for 25 years. I've seen the best pilots in the world come through this program. You have the knowledge and the dedication, but the political reality is that Washington will never approve it. What if they could be convinced that it's necessary?" Sarah asked. "It would take someone with enormous influence, someone willing to stake their career on changing a policy that's been in place since the Air Force began," Hayes replied. "And, frankly, I don't know anyone with that kind of courage." That evening, Sarah sat alone in her temporary quarters, staring at a letter from home. Her mother had written about the pride the whole town felt in her service. Her father had even admitted that maybe she had chosen the right path after all. But Sarah knew that unless she could break through this final barrier, she would spend her entire career watching other people live her dream. She made a decision that would either end her military career or change it forever. The next morning, she requested a meeting with the base commander, General Robert Sterling. Her hands shook as she walked toward his office, knowing that she was about to ask the impossible from one of the most powerful men in the Air Force. General Robert Sterling's office was intimidating by design. Photos of combat missions covered the walls, and his desk sat beneath a large American flag. Sterling himself was a legend in the Air Force, a veteran of 3 wars who had earned the respect of every pilot who served under him. When Sarah entered his office, she felt like David approaching Goliath. "Sergeant Mitchell," the general said without looking up from his paperwork. "I understand you want to discuss the F-12 program." "Yes, sir." Sarah's voice was steadier than she felt. Sterling finally raised his eyes to meet hers. They were steel gray and seemed to see right through her. "Son," he began, then stopped himself. "Sergeant, I've heard good things about your technical abilities. Colonel Hayes speaks very highly of your contributions to the program." "Thank you, sir. But I also understand you have some unrealistic expectations about your future role." His voice was not unkind, but it was firm. The military has rules for good reasons. Women are not permitted in combat positions, and the F-12 is very much a combat aircraft. Sarah took a deep breath. This was her moment. "General, with respect, I believe those rules are preventing the Air Force from using its best people in the most important positions." Sterling's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's a bold statement, Sergeant. Are you suggesting that you're among our best people?" "I'm suggesting that gender shouldn't determine who gets the opportunity to prove themselves, sir." The general leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "Tell me something, Mitchell. Why is flying so important to you? Why risk your entire career for something you could never achieve?" Sarah thought about all the easy answers she could give: serving her country, pushing boundaries, making history. But she decided on honesty instead. "Sir, when I work on those aircraft, when I study their systems and watch them fly, I feel like I'm exactly where I belong. I've never felt that about anything else in my life. I believe I could be an excellent pilot. And I believe the Air Force needs excellent pilots more than it needs to maintain traditions that don't serve any practical purpose." Sterling was quiet for several minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed slightly. "Sergeant, what would you say if I told you that I've been having similar thoughts lately? That maybe some of our policies are outdated?" Sarah's heart jumped, but she kept her expression neutral. "I would say that change requires courage, sir, and that great leaders are often the ones willing to make difficult decisions." "Flattery, Sergeant." "Honesty, sir." Sterling stood and walked to his window, looking out at the flight line where F-12 sat like sleeping eagles. "You know, I have a daughter about your age. She's a doctor now, but when she was growing up, she wanted to be an astronaut. I told her the same thing your father probably told you, that some dreams were for boys." He turned back to Sarah. "She proved me wrong in everything else. Maybe she would have proved me wrong about that too. Sir, if you gave me the chance, I would work harder than any pilot in this program. I would meet every standard, pass every test, and prove that I belong there. The political pressure would be enormous," Sterling said thoughtfully. "I would have congressmen, Pentagon officials, and senior commanders questioning my judgment. Some would say I was destroying military discipline for the sake of social experimentation. And others would say you were ensuring that the Air Force gets the best people, regardless of gender," Sarah replied. Sterling returned to his desk and picked up a thick folder. "I've been reading your file, Mitchell. Your test scores, your technical evaluations, your fitness reports. If you were a man, you would have been in pilot training 3 years ago." "Yes, sir. If I were to hypothetically recommend you for an experimental pilot training program, purely hypothetical, you understand, what would you be willing to sacrifice for that opportunity?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Everything, sir. My comfort, my safety, my reputation. Whatever it takes." "And if you failed? If you washed out of training or couldn't meet the standards?" "Then I would accept that failure, sir. But I would know that I had been given a fair chance to succeed or fail based on my abilities, not my gender." Sterling nodded slowly. "There would be conditions. Strict conditions. You would have to score higher than any male candidate in every phase of training. You would receive no special treatment, no allowances for the difficulties you would face. You would be under constant scrutiny from people hoping to see you fail. I understand, sir. And if you succeeded, you would become a symbol whether you wanted to or not. Every woman in the military would be watching you. Your performance would affect their opportunities for decades to come. The weight of that responsibility hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had been thinking about her own dreams, but Sterling was right. This was bigger than her. Sir, I believe that's all the more reason to succeed. Sterling picked up his phone. Colonel Hayes, come to my office immediately, and bring Major Thompson with you. He hung up and looked at Sarah again. What I'm about to propose goes against every regulation in the book. It will require approvals from the Pentagon. Congress will likely hold hearings, and the media will have a field day. Sarah felt her pulse racing. Sir, are you saying? I'm saying that maybe it's time for the Air Force to lead instead of follow. Maybe it's time to judge people by their abilities instead of their chromosomes. He paused. But understand this, Sergeant. If I go to bat for you, and you let me down, it won't just end your career. It will end mine too. When Colonel Hayes and Major Thompson arrived, the tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Sterling didn't waste time with preliminaries. Gentlemen, I'm considering recommending Sergeant Mitchell for an experimental pilot training program. I want your honest assessment of her capabilities. Colonel Hayes glanced at Thompson before responding. Sir, her technical knowledge is exceptional. Her dedication is unquestionable. But the political ramifications. I'm not asking about politics, Colonel. I'm asking about her potential as a pilot. Major Thompson shifted uncomfortably. General, if she were a man, I would say she has all the right qualities. But, sir, the physical demands of flying the F-12. Are you questioning whether a woman can handle the physical stress, Major? Sir, I'm questioning whether this particular woman can. With respect, she's never been tested under those conditions. Sterling turned to Sarah. What do you say to that concern, Sergeant? Sarah looked directly at Major Thompson. Sir, I say that the only way to find out is to put me in that cockpit and see what happens. 3 months later, Sarah found herself standing outside the Pentagon, wearing her dress uniform and carrying a briefing folder that could change military history. General Sterling had spent weeks navigating the complex bureaucracy, calling in favors, and building support for what many considered an impossible proposal. The conference room was filled with the most powerful people in the military. Generals, admirals, and civilian officials sat around a polished table, their faces showing varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity. At the head of the table sat Defense Secretary William Crawford, a man whose word could reshape military policy with a single decision. General Sterling, Secretary Crawford began. You've requested this meeting to discuss what you call an experimental pilot candidate evaluation program. Please explain exactly what you're proposing. Sterling stood confidently. Mr. Secretary, we've identified a candidate with exceptional technical knowledge and dedication who we believe could contribute significantly to our most advanced aircraft programs. The candidate meets or exceeds all current standards except for one outdated restriction. The gender restriction, said Admiral Patricia Morrison, one of only 2 women in the room. General, are you asking us to fundamentally change military policy for one person? I'm asking you to change military policy for all qualified people, Sterling replied. Sergeant Mitchell represents an opportunity to test whether our current restrictions serve any practical purpose or merely perpetuate outdated traditions. Secretary Crawford looked directly at Sarah. Sergeant Mitchell, do you understand the magnitude of what you're asking? You would be challenging policies that have been in place since the founding of the Air Force. Yes, sir. I understand that I would be asking for the same opportunity that any qualified man would receive automatically. General Marcus Webb, a decorated combat veteran, leaned forward aggressively. Sergeant, combat flying requires split-second decisions under life-threatening stress. The enemy doesn't care about your feelings or your dreams. They care about killing you and anyone you're supposed to protect. Sir, I've been making split-second decisions about aircraft systems for 6 years. I've worked under pressure, solved critical problems, and never failed to complete a mission. I'm not asking for special consideration. I'm asking to be judged by the same standards as everyone else. But you're not everyone else, General Webb continued. You're a woman in a man's profession. Unit cohesion, physical limitations, psychological factors, all of these matter in combat. Admiral Morrison interrupted. Marcus, with respect, those are the same arguments that were used to keep women out of naval positions 20 years ago. Many of those concerns proved to be unfounded. Flying a desk is different from flying a fighter jet, Patricia, Webb replied sharply. The tension in the room was rising. Sarah could feel her opportunity slipping away as the discussion became a broader debate about military policy. She made a decision that was either brilliant or career-ending. Excuse me, she said, standing up. The room fell silent. Generals, I understand your concerns about setting precedents and changing policies. But you're debating theory while I'm offering you practical proof. Secretary Crawford frowned. Sergeant, this is highly irregular. Sir, you want to know if a woman can fly the F-12? Put me in the simulator right now. Test my physical limits, my decision-making under pressure, my technical knowledge. Don't debate whether it's possible. Find out if I can do it. General Webb smiled coldly. That's quite a challenge, Sergeant. Are you prepared to have your failure witnessed by everyone in this room? Sir, I'm prepared to have my success witnessed by everyone in this room. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Finally, Secretary Crawford spoke. General Sterling, is such a demonstration possible? Yes, sir. We have a full F-12 simulator at the Pentagon training facility. It can replicate any flight scenario, including combat conditions. Then, let's end this debate with facts instead of opinions, Crawford declared. We'll reconvene in 2 hours at the simulator facility. Sergeant Mitchell will undergo the same evaluation we give to experienced F-12 pilots. If she passes, we'll consider moving forward with General Sterling's proposal. If she fails, he didn't need to finish the sentence. 2 hours later, Sarah stood before the most sophisticated flight simulator in the world. The F-12 simulator was an exact replica of the aircraft's cockpit, capable of generating G-forces that could crush an unprepared pilot. Around the simulator, the military leadership watched through reinforced glass. General Webb had personally selected the test scenarios, emergency situations that had challenged even veteran pilots. Engine failures, hydraulic problems, enemy attacks, navigation challenges, each designed to push a pilot to their absolute limits. Sarah strapped herself into the simulator seat, her heart pounding but her hands steady. She had spent 6 years preparing for this moment, studying every system, memorizing every procedure, dreaming of this opportunity. Through the glass, she could see the faces watching her, some hoping for her success, others expecting her failure. The first scenario began with a routine flight that quickly turned into an emergency. Multiple system failures cascaded through the aircraft while enemy fighters appeared on her radar. Sarah's training kicked in automatically. Her hands moved across the controls with precision. Her voice remained calm as she communicated with air traffic control, and her decisions came quickly and correctly. For 90 minutes, the simulator threw everything at her. G-forces that made her vision tunnel, emergency procedures that required split-second timing, combat scenarios that tested her courage and skill. Through it all, Sarah maintained control of the aircraft and completed every mission objective. When the simulation finally ended, Sarah climbed out of the cockpit on shaky legs. The G-forces had pushed her body to its limits, but she had not failed a single test. The room was completely silent as the observers processed what they had witnessed. General Webb approached the control console and examined the test results. His expression was unreadable as he studied the data. Finally, he looked up at Sarah with something that might have been respect. Sergeant Mitchell, he said slowly, in 25 years of evaluating pilots, I have rarely seen a performance like that. Your reaction times, your technical knowledge, your decision-making under pressure, all were exceptional. Sarah felt a surge of hope, but Webb wasn't finished. However, he continued, one demonstration doesn't prove you can handle the sustained pressures of an actual combat environment. The physical and psychological demands of real flight operations are far more challenging than any simulator can replicate. Sarah's heart sank, but then General Sterling stepped forward. Marcus, by that logic, no pilot should ever be certified based on simulator training. Every F-12 pilot in our program proved themselves in this same simulator before they ever flew the actual aircraft. The debate was about to begin again when Secretary Crawford raised his hand for silence. He had been quietly reviewing the test data, and now he looked directly at Sarah. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said, "what you've accomplished here today is remarkable. But General Webb raises valid concerns about real-world applications." He paused, and Sarah felt her dreams slipping away again. Then Crawford smiled. "Which is why I'm authorizing a full pilot training evaluation. You'll attend the same training as any other F-12 candidate, meet the same standards, and face the same challenges. If you succeed, you'll become the first woman qualified to fly our most advanced fighter aircraft." The room erupted. Some officials applauded, others looked stunned, and a few appeared angry. But Sarah heard only one thing clearly. She had won the right to try. The pilot training facility at Edwards Air Force Base was a place where dreams came to die. For every pilot who earned their wings, 3 others washed out, unable to handle the physical demands, technical complexity, or psychological pressure. Sarah arrived knowing that she couldn't afford to be one of the failures. The other pilot candidates treated her with a mixture of curiosity and hostility. Word had spread quickly through the military about the experimental female pilot, and opinions were sharply divided. Some resented what they saw as political interference in military training. Others were curious to see if she could really measure up to male standards. Flight training began with ground school, weeks of intensive classroom instruction covering aerodynamics, navigation, weather systems, and emergency procedures. Sarah had studied these subjects for years, but the pace was relentless. 12-hour days of lectures, followed by hours of individual study, with constant testing and evaluation. Her first real challenge came during physical conditioning. The training was designed to simulate the G-forces and physical stress of high-performance flying. Pilots had to maintain consciousness and motor function while experiencing forces that would incapacitate normal people. Sarah struggled initially. Her smaller frame meant she experienced G-forces differently than her male colleagues, and she had to develop new techniques for maintaining blood flow to her brain during high-stress maneuvers. While other candidates relied on brute strength, Sarah learned to use breathing techniques, muscle contractions, and mental focus to overcome her physical disadvantages. Slowly, her performance improved. By the end of the first month, she was matching the physical standards set for all candidates. Her instructors were impressed, but some of her fellow trainees remained skeptical. "She's working twice as hard as the rest of us just to keep up," muttered Lieutenant Carl Rodriguez during a break between training sessions. What happens when the pressure really builds? The answer came during her first actual flight in an F-12. Sarah had flown smaller aircraft before, but nothing had prepared her for the raw power of the advanced fighter jet. The acceleration pressed her back into her seat with tremendous force, and the controls required precise timing and strength to manage effectively. Her instructor, Major Lisa Chun, one of only a handful of female test pilots in the Air Force, pushed Sarah hard during that first flight. "Forget that you're making history," she said over the radio. "Right now, you're just a pilot trying not to crash a $100 million aircraft." For 6 months, Sarah lived and breathed flying. She studied aircraft manuals until late at night, practiced emergency procedures until they became automatic responses, and flew training missions that challenged every skill she possessed. Her scores gradually improved, but she remained in the middle of her training class, good enough to continue, but not yet exceptional. The breakthrough came during a particularly challenging training exercise. The scenario involved a complex mission requiring precise navigation, in-flight refueling, and simulated combat maneuvers. Several experienced pilots had struggled with this exercise, and expectations for Sarah were low. But something clicked during that flight. All her years of studying aircraft systems, all her hours of practice, all her determination came together in perfect harmony. She executed the navigation with mathematical precision, completed the refueling without a single error, and flew the combat maneuvers with a grace that impressed even her critics. When she landed, her instructor was waiting with a rare smile. "Mitchell, that was textbook perfect. I couldn't have flown it better myself." Word of Sarah's performance spread quickly through the base. Suddenly, her fellow trainees began treating her differently, not as an experiment or a political statement, but as a pilot who had proven she belonged there. The respect was something she had been working toward for months, and it felt better than any medal or commendation. But the real test was still to come. The final evaluation involved a series of flights under increasingly difficult conditions. Night flying, bad weather, equipment failures, and simulated emergencies, each designed to test whether a pilot could handle the worst situations they might face in actual combat. Sarah's final evaluation flight was scheduled for a Friday morning in December. She had been preparing for weeks, reviewing every procedure and studying every possible scenario. As she walked toward the F-12 on the flight line, she saw a crowd of people gathered near the operations building. General Sterling was there, along with Colonel Hayes and many of the officials who had watched her simulator demonstration months earlier. News reporters with cameras clustered behind security barriers, and Sarah realized that her final flight would be witnessed by the world. The pressure was enormous. If she failed now, after coming so far, it would not only end her own dreams, but also set back opportunities for other women for years to come. Every mistake would be analyzed. Every error would be used as proof that women couldn't handle combat flying. As Sarah completed her pre-flight inspection, Major Thompson approached her. The pilot who had once questioned her abilities now looked at her with genuine respect. "Mitchell," he said quietly, "forget about all those people watching. Forget about making history or proving points. Just fly the airplane like you know how to fly it." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied. "I will." The flight plan called for a complex mission involving multiple waypoints, aerial maneuvers, and emergency procedures. As Sarah taxied toward the runway, she felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before every flight. But this time, it was mixed with a deep sense of calm. She belonged here, in this aircraft, doing this job. The takeoff was smooth and powerful. As the F-12 climbed into the desert sky, Sarah felt all her doubts and fears fall away. She was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was born to do. For the next 2 hours, she flew with precision and confidence that amazed everyone monitoring her progress. Every maneuver was executed perfectly, every emergency procedure handled flawlessly. When she finally touched down and taxied back to the ramp, Sarah knew she had achieved something remarkable. As she climbed out of the cockpit, General Sterling was the first to greet her. His weathered face showed a pride that words couldn't express. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said in a voice that carried across the gathered crowd, "congratulations. You are now qualified to fly the F-12. You are officially the first woman certified on our most advanced fighter aircraft." The crowd erupted in applause, but Sarah barely heard it. She was thinking about a little girl in Kansas who used to lie in wheat fields, dreaming of flying among the clouds. That little girl had grown up to break barriers and prove that dreams really could come true with enough determination, courage, and the support of people willing to give talent a chance to shine. As reporters asked their questions and cameras flashed around her, Sarah looked up at the sky where other F-12s were practicing their maneuvers. Soon, she would be up there with them, not as an experiment or a symbol, but simply as a pilot doing the job she was born to do.